Several people at the club noticed a man in his mid-20s standing alone at one end of the dance floor. He was dressed entirely in black, and he stood staring silently at the dancers throughout the night.
Farnborough is a modest yet bustling town in the Rushmore district of Hampshire, England. Its history is intertwined with Britain's journey into modern science and aviation. The Royal Air Force established the Royal Aircraft Establishment in the town in 1905. It was a critical site both during World Wars and was the scene for much of Britain's aeronautical advancements. Today the town is a much more quiet place, with rows of brick houses and vast open green spaces. On the night of the 7th of June 1992, the calm of the town was especially notable. It was a mild, clear summer evening, perfect for friends gathering outside. In 14-year-old Tony Howe's back garden on Station Road, stories filled the air as he camped with 3 of his friends under the stars. The teenage boys stayed up well past midnight, excitedly swapping stories and sharing secrets. But at around 3 a.m, the silence was shattered by the distant, jarring sound of a scream that sliced through the night. It came from somewhere beyond the garden fence. The boys fell silent and exchanged wide-eyed glances. For a moment they became fearful, but they quickly shrugged it off, convincing themselves that it was just other children messing around. They couldn't have been more wrong. Katie Rackliff's story had all the hallmarks of a comfortable, picturesque English upbringing. The family's sprawling home in Hawley, Hampshire was like something from a glossy magazine, with its Tudor facade and large grounds. Inside, the home's decor was equally elegant. Plush, pale carpets and Turkish rugs offset by delicate flower arrangements, carefully curated prints, and ornaments displayed in mahogany cabinets. It was the kind of house that announced stability and success without saying a word. Katie had been raised alongside her older sister Joanne, with every advantage her parents could provide. Both girls attended Hawley Place, a prestigious private school for girls, and when they each passed their driving tests, they were gifted new cars. Despite her privilege, however, Katie wanted something different. She turned down her spot at the local technical college, where she'd been set to study travel, and instead began working as a hairdresser at Bumble's 2 in the town of Frimley. It was a decision that didn't go down well with her mother Helen, who often commented on what she called the waste of a private education. But Katie found solace in her father's support. For Joseph, Katie's choice to work was a sign of her independence and strength, qualities that he quietly admired. However, as summer unfolded in 1992, tension simmered beneath the surface. A small rift between Katie and her family grew into something much larger. Katie felt that she needed space, so she moved out of the family home and moved in with her friend Michelle Fisher, who had her own plans and dreams. In Michelle's bedroom, the 2 19-year-old girls would spend long evenings chatting about their futures, about places far beyond the quiet town that they knew. They dreamed of Los Angeles and imagined lives full of excitement and independence. But as TV images of riots and unrest flickered across their screen, the glamour of LA dimmed. Katie had hoped that her departure from home would bring clarity, but it soon became apparent that freedom came with its risks. And while she and Michelle spoke of distant dangers, Katie would soon discover that trouble was much closer to home. The morning after Toby and his friends heard the screams, the weather was dreary. There was a faint drizzle pattering against the fabric of the tent, where the teenage boys now lay, and it had begun to seep through. The dampness pushed them into action, and they shuffled out, deciding that a quick walk would shake off the chill. Victoria Road Cemetery was only a short distance from Toby's home, its boundary lined with trees. As they strolled past, something unusual caught their attention. It was a bundle, lying awkwardly between a wall and a car just off the path. Their steps slowed, curiosity turning to dread as they drew closer. Crimson streaked the ground, casting an eerie contrast against the damp pavement. The figure was of a young woman, her once white bolero blouse pushed up and her navy slacks pulled down. The boys stopped dead in their tracks and then bolted back to Tony's home, where they frantically called police. The officers arrived quickly and were met by a horrifying scene. The young woman was evidently deceased and had been for some time. She had been attacked with a 6.5-inch knife, and the brutality was incomprehensible. She had sustained 32 separate stab wounds, including through her ribs and heart. Her anus and vagina had also been stabbed. The knife wounds were so forceful that in several places the blade had passed completely through her body. Without any identification on her person, the police released a description of her clothing and jewellery, hoping to learn her identity. Katie's family immediately recognised the description. It was Joseph, her father, who stepped forward to formally identify Katie's body in the mortuary. Following the discovery of Katie Rackliff's body, detectives moved quickly, establishing a murder incident room to coordinate their investigation. They scoured the cemetery grounds and surrounding streets for clues, attempting to piece together the final moments of her life. Soon it became clear that Katie had been intercepted by her killer along Highview Road, close to where she was eventually found. Evidence at the scene indicated that she had been attacked and then dragged or carried across the road, and her body left just around the corner. It wasn't too long before detectives stumbled upon an intriguing lead. A car, a green Opel Rexford, had been stolen from Station Road the night before Katie's body was discovered. Station Road lay only about 150 yards from where Katie's body was found, raising the possibility that the murder and the car theft were linked. Police alerted the public to keep an eye out for the vehicle, hoping it could hold the key to tracking down Katie's killer. Meanwhile, detectives began retracing her steps on the night that she was killed. She had spent the evening at Ragamuffin's nightclub in Kimberley, Surrey, about 4 miles from the scene where her body was found. Katie had recently celebrated her 19th birthday, and at first her spirits were high as she danced and laughed with friends. But the night then took a darker turn. Katie had been drinking heavily, and the recent breakup with her boyfriend, Metin Mustafa, who was also at the nightclub, soon cast a shadow over her mood. The breakup and a recent drunk driving charge weighed heavily on Katie's mind, and as her alcohol intake increased, she grew visibly upset. Katie slipped out of Ragamuffins that night without telling anybody. Michelle, her friend, later recalled, "I last saw her dancing at Ragamuffins. I waited and waited for her and then assumed she'd gone home with someone else." Michelle had planned for them to return home together, but Katie was nowhere to be found. Detectives suspected that she might have been coaxed outside, but witness accounts revealed that Katie had actually followed her ex-boyfriend, Metin, outside. She'd been hoping to reconcile. Outside, she told him that if he proposed to her then and there, she would have said yes. Their conversation was brief, and he made it clear that he wasn't interested in rekindling their relationship. So Katie walked away, disappearing into the night. She was last seen by witnesses stumbling through a nearby car park. In the hours that followed, somehow, she ended up 4 miles away, brutally attacked and left to die. Now, the detectives faced a race against time to unearth the identity of the killer before he struck again. After days of meticulous investigation, detectives began to focus on the theory that Katie's killer was a stranger who had been sexually motivated. Although there was no evidence of rape, the way that Katie's clothing had been arranged, exposing her body, suggested a sexual motivation. By all accounts, Katie was a home-loving young woman, unlikely to attract trouble. According to a police spokesperson, her parents are absolutely devastated by what has happened. Katie was apparently the sort of girl who would never get into any sort of trouble. Detective Superintendent Ray Piper, who was leading the case, had his suspicions. He stated, "Someone is harbouring this man. He's very, very evil and has committed a very sadistic attack. It's pretty obvious that the motive was sexual." He urged anyone who might have seen someone bloodied in the hours after the murder to come forward, hoping to track down Katie's killer before he could harm someone else. As the local community reeled from the news of Katie's death, a new tip reached the detectives. A 16-year-old girl who knew Katie claimed to have seen her in the early morning hours of Sunday. She had been walking in Camberley with a man that the witness didn't recognise. Recalling the encounter, she noted, "She had had far too much to drink and was swaying from side to side. At first, I thought she was alone, but then I noticed a man walking close by in the same direction. I think she'd met him in the club." Concerned, the friend approached Katie, asking if she was okay, but Katie didn't seem to recognise her. She remembered, "In the end, I left her because I assumed she was going to the car park to meet up with other friends. I wish I hadn't now." Although the friend didn't see the man that Katie was with clearly, she described him as a clean-shaven young man in his 20s, wearing a blue or black jacket, black trousers and a white shirt. With this new lead, detectives were piecing together the final moments of Katie's life. They soon learned that two other men had also been speaking to Katie after she left the nightclub that night. One was described as an Asian man known locally as the Korean kickboxer, and the other of Afro-Caribbean descent, who had a distinctive hairstyle with an arrow shaved into his hair. After these descriptions were circulated in the media, these two men came forward voluntarily and were ruled out of the investigation. However, the third man, who had been seen by Katie's friend, remained elusive. Detectives updated the public with this man's description. He wore a white baggy t-shirt, black trousers that were slightly too short, white socks with black shoes. Superintendent Piper shared, "We don't know who that man is, but he would appear to have been the last man to see her alive." Although the stolen green Opel Rexford had been a promising lead, it was ultimately ruled out after it was found just half a mile away from where it had been taken. Detectives were now certain that Katie's killer was the mysterious man seen with her that night. They just needed to find him. As the day slipped by with no resolution in Katie's murder, a deepening sense of despair settled over her family and the community. On the 12th of June, her parents, Helen and Joseph, and her sister Joanne, appeared in a tearful press conference, urging anyone with any information to come forward. With tears in his eyes, Joseph said, "We remain numbed by the senseless killing of our daughter. The family seeks continuing privacy to grieve for Katie, but we hope this appeal may persuade anyone with vital information to contact police." He described his daughter as lovable and popular, and said he struggled to understand why she might have accepted a lift from a stranger. This comment came from the fact that detectives were now investigating a new angle involving an eyewitness report from a service station. Shortly after Katie was killed, a blood-stained motorist was seen there, claiming he had been in a fight. The witness described him as around 20 years old, slim, with blonde hair and wearing a light grey sweatshirt. Detectives wondered if possibly Katie had accepted a lift from a stranger and was attacked and killed. As the investigation dragged into late June, frustrations grew. 2 local businesses even offered a £10,000 reward for information, yet more than 600 messages logged by the incident room and the round-the-clock efforts of 40 detectives still hadn't brought them closer to identifying Katie's killer. New leads emerged sporadically, raising hopes, only to fade again as no solid evidence surfaced. One tip arrived about a blue Ford Transit van. It was seen near the crime scene around 3:20 a.m. on the morning of Katie's murder, the same time that Toby and his friends had heard a scream. The driver, who was described as 20 to 24 years old, with short light brown hair and a moustache, had been driving erratically, attracting attention. Detectives appealed for information about this van, but once again they were met with silence. The next month, the case was highlighted on Crime Watch. During the segment, detectives shared a detailed description of Katie's final hours and released 2 identikit images. The first showed the driver of the blue Ford Transit.
The van was a blue Transit Ford van. He had short-cropped brown hair, was aged between 20 and 24, and had a moustache. He was clearly lost.
The second was a new man, not previously mentioned in the case. A man described as a loner who'd been spotted in the nightclub on the night that Katie was killed. Dressed entirely in black and sporting black crocodile cowboy boots, he had unsettled numerous club-goers with his odd behaviour.
Several people at the club noticed a man in his mid-20s standing alone at one end of the dance floor. He was dressed entirely in black, and he stood staring silently at the dancers throughout the night. Who was he? During the evening, Kate met a former boyfriend, Metin. They'd ended their relationship some 6 months ago, but Kate was still very fond of him.
Oh, mine. It's just up the top there somewhere.
Is he still with Dawn?
Yeah, it's the boys' night out, isn't it? So.
Can I have a word with you?
Yeah.
As closing time approached, the lone man was still standing in the same place. There were 516 people at Ragamuffins that night. Police have spoken to all except 33 of them.
Detectives now questioned if this strange figure had followed Katie from the nightclub, setting her on the tragic path that ended in her murder. With every new lead and theory, the hope of justice flickered, only to dim as silence and uncertainty loomed over the investigation. Years passed slowly for Katie's family, the relentless weight of unresolved grief hanging in their home, filling every room with a haunting silence. Though they tried to piece together a semblance of normalcy, the scars of loss remained unhealed, especially for Helen. She threw herself into bridge and golf, anything to keep away from the home where every room reminded her of her daughter. She never went into Katie's bedroom. It was frozen in time, a relic of the life she once lived. Her husband Joseph buried his sorrow in racing and golfing, but their collective efforts couldn't erase the empty place that Katie had left behind. Despite the pain, they carried on as best they could, even speaking publicly, hoping their words might reach someone who knew something. The detectives investigating Katie's murder worked tirelessly, following lead after lead. There was the strange man in the nightclub, who eventually came forward and was ruled out as a suspect, but the driver of the mysterious van remained an enigma. In an interview with the Evening Standard, Helen reflected on how life had turned so suddenly. Until my father died last year, I used to say how lucky we were. But then my cat died, my father died, and I remember Katie saying to me, "Who's going to be next? I hope it's not the dog." Unbeknownst to the family, however, the truth was closer than they could imagine, and far more disturbing. The killer, who had been hiding in plain sight, defied all expectations. For the one responsible for Katie's murder was a little girl. Annette Sinney was working as a prison officer in Bullwood Hall Young Offenders Institution in Essex when she received an unexpected letter, a handwritten declaration of love. It was January 1996, and the letter was from a 16-year-old inmate named Sharon Carr. She was a deeply troubled teenager, and her history of violence had led her to the Young Offenders Institution. Sharon Carr had been born into a fractured family in Belize, raised in poverty by her mother Maria, who struggled to provide for her and her siblings. Carr's father had disappeared when she was young, leaving Maria to support the family alone. Maria had her own struggles as well, especially with alcohol, and she had a deep interest in voodoo. In search of a better life, the family relocated to Kimberley in Surrey in 1986, where Maria remarried, and they welcomed 2 more children into the family. For a time, things seemed to be looking up for them. Carr adapted to her new environment, and initially she excelled in school. She even became involved in her school's basketball team and served as a form representative. Her vice principal recalled her as charming and lively. A lot of staff liked her and found her refreshing. However, her mother's second marriage disintegrated violently after Maria threw boiling fat over her husband. Carr was standing nearby, watching the entire thing unfold. She knew that her mother had a violent streak, and she wasn't immune to it. If ever Carr misbehaved, her mother put pepper on her genitals. Over time, Carr's pleasant demeanour faded as she became more distant and erratic. She began gravitating towards older boys, frequently getting into fights, and she developed an aggressive reputation. She was sent to live with foster parents Pat and Henry Atkin, and stayed with them intermittently for 2 years. She was also staying for days at a time with a friend and her mother, and sometimes returned to the family home. Around this time, she confided in someone that she'd been raped when she was 9, a trauma she claimed had ignited a hatred and desire for revenge. Carr said that it was payback time, and that she wanted to wage a war against the world. The young girl began hanging around with a group of youths, aged from 17 to 20. She was just 12 years old, but she would sneak out at night to join the gang as they raced around the town in cars. She smoked and she drank, and boasted about carrying a knife, saying that she was prepared to use it. One friend said of her, "A lot of people were scared of her, and she used to hang around with boys most of the time." Her behaviour at school soon escalated to the point of suspension on 2 separate occasions, and her aggression turned physical. In one incident, she hit a staff member, and in another, she locked a female teacher she had become infatuated with in a cupboard. But it was in June of 1994, during an unprovoked attack at Collingwood College Comprehensive School, that her violent tendencies took an even darker turn. Without warning, Sharon Carr attacked a fellow student in the school bathroom with a knife, puncturing the girl's lung and nearly puncturing her heart. The victim, Anne-Marie Clifford, later recounted the attack and said that Carr was smiling as she stabbed her. She thought that she was going to die, and she probably would have if it wasn't for other students coming into the bathroom and intervening. After Carr was arrested at the school, she divulged even more disturbing details to police. She said that she had recently been stabbing local cats, and had even beheaded a neighbour's dog and left its body on a nearby common for others to find. For police and psychologists alike, her disturbing admissions indicated a young girl teetering on the edge of escalating violence. After Sharon Carr's arrest for the brutal stabbing of a fellow pupil, she was placed at the Middlesex Lodge Assessment Centre in Hayes. There, psychiatrists evaluated her psychological state, concluding that although Carr exhibited a severe personality disorder, she was not technically mentally ill. Carr's violent tendencies only intensified, leading to another attack when she attempted to strangle 2 female staff members. She was charged with 2 counts of actual bodily harm and was convicted in December of 1994. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, an indefinite sentence typically reserved for serious juvenile offenders. This marked her entry into the psychiatric system, yet containment did little to curb her aggression. She continued attacking female staff members, prompting her transfer to Aycliffe Secure Centre, an all-boys facility where authorities hoped her behaviour could be managed. By September of 1995, she was transferred again, this time to Bullwood Hall, where the staff hoped the more structured environment would contain her escalating outbursts. Shortly after her arrival, Bullwood Hall prison officer Annette Sinney received a handwritten letter from Sharon Carr. It was a profession of love, filled with Carr's intense and confused emotions. The letter read, "I would do anything for you. I really would. I think of ways I could win your heart, but I'm so confused. There's so much I need to say that I'm afraid it will end our friendship." To Annette, the letter was familiar. She had received similar messages before from inmates seeking connection, comfort, or simply a sense of attachment to somebody on the outside world. She folded it away, considering it part of the job. But at their next meeting, Carr's fixation took an unexpected dark turn. She approached Annette and told her she had a secret that she wanted to share. Annette later recalled, "She said to me, 'I've murdered someone.' Just like that. I remember it like it was yesterday." Annette's curiosity and concern were piqued. She asked Carr for more details, and the teenage girl replied that she was responsible for Katie Rackliff's murder. Carr explained that she had stabbed Katie to death after picking her up in a car with 2 older boys. Her voice was steady and calm as she recounted stabbing Katie repeatedly. She hinted that after Katie's death, they had violated her, although Carr's account shifted over time. The confession didn't stop with Annette. Carr repeated her story to Simon Pilling, a mental health nurse at Bullwood Hall. According to Pilling, she was matter-of-fact and jokey about the murder. Her casual tone, he noted, was devoid of any guilt or empathy. Later, Carr shared a similar version of events with another prison officer, Paul Donovan. She claimed that she and her 2 accomplices had driven Katie down a small lane. Once there, she said she stabbed Katie before they took turns sexually assaulting her. Carr's accounts varied slightly each time, but her admission remained consistent enough to alarm the staff. Following Sharon Carr's multiple confessions, detectives were immediately called to Bullwood Hall Detention Centre to meet with her. During their interview, Carr was forthcoming about her involvement in Katie's murder, but her story shifted with each retelling. Initially, Carr claimed to detectives she had been with 2 boys in a car when they picked Katie up at a bus stop and offered her a lift. According to this account, Carr stabbed Katie in the back of the car, after which the boys reportedly engaged in sexual activity with Katie before they abandoned her body. In her second version, Carr's tone became hostile, as she described feeling jealous of Katie, who was allegedly flirting with the 2 boys. She claimed that this jealousy drove her to drag Katie out of the car and stab her to death. Finally, Carr provided a third account, saying that the boys hadn't been involved at all, although she maintained that there had indeed been a car involved. Across all 3 versions, Carr consistently admitted to stabbing Katie to death, but her portrayal of the boys' involvement varied dramatically. Despite these discrepancies, detectives were convinced that Carr was the killer, as she provided disturbing details about the location and manner of Katie's wounds. She knew specifics that had never been disclosed to the public. But Carr's knowledge went even further. She accurately described a distinctive gold bracelet that Katie had been wearing, claiming that she had stolen it during the attack. This detail, which had also been withheld from the public, reinforced the detective's belief that Carr was indeed telling the truth. Reflecting on her statements, one detective described Carr as cold, detached, and without any feeling. He then added, "I've never been involved in an interview like it." Another said, "Katie was everything Sharon wasn't. We do not know why she killed her. Jealousy and envy are the only motives I can think of." After the confessions, the investigation turned to Carr's home, where detectives uncovered alarming evidence in the bedroom loft. Hidden away was a handwritten journal, documenting Carr's disturbing thoughts and violent fantasies. In one chilling entry she had written, "Killing is my business, and business is good." The more detectives read, the more unnerved they became, finding pages filled with expressions of rage, vengeance, and an obsession with violence. Inside Carr's journals, they found written confessions that left no doubt that she killed Katie. She detailed her emotions and fantasies with a startling lack of remorse, writing, "It's not like I'm one of those pussy girls who break down and confess everything because of a guilty conscience. What's a guilty conscience? I ask myself every day. I've never found one. I swear I was born to be a murderer. Every night I see the devil in my dreams, sometimes in my mirror, but I realise it's just me and my heart of terror." Page after page, Carr referenced Katie's murder, expressing an eerie fascination with the fact. She even wrote that if she were ever arrested and charged, she would take her own life on the anniversary of Katie's murder. On one page, Carr had sketched the knife she claimed to have used, along with a drawing of the murder scene, immortalising the night. Her writings were not limited to narrative entries. She had even written poems such as one titled Dreamscape, in which she described the murder as sheer ecstasy. Another entry from the 13th of January 1995 was disturbingly graphic. It read, "Remember KR? Oh God, she did get me going. So hot. Pity really." Carr openly confessed to experiencing a twisted thrill, writing, "Death by knife wounds and sex go together. They both take you, and all women should be taken." Carr's violent thoughts continued, with another page reading, "I wish I could kill you again. I promise I would make you suffer more this time, you fucking slag. Your terrified screams turned me on." In another entry, Carr described the actual murder of Katie, writing that she told Katie she had a knife, but Katie didn't seem to react. She continued writing, "I bring the knife into her chest. Her eyes are closing. She's playing with me. She must react. So I bring the knife to her again and again. I don't want to hurt her, but I need to do violence to her, and that's far more powerful within me than lust." In chilling detail, Carr described watching Katie's final breaths, writing, "I hear her gasp. I guess she was trying to breathe. The air stops at the back of her throat. I know all her life her breathing has worked, but it doesn't now, and I'm joyful." As detectives sifted through Carr's writing, they found continuous references to Katie from 1994 until 1996. She was clearly consumed with thoughts of the girl she had killed, even speculating morbidly about Katie's decomposed state. She had coldly written, "I bet she's all bone and maggots." On the 10th of May 1996, Sharon Carr appeared before magistrates and was charged with Katie's murder. There wasn't any movement in the case until February of the next year, when Carr pleaded not guilty. It was the beginning of her trial the next day, the 25th of February, and during opening statements the prosecution laid out their case. Prosecutor Stuart Jones said that the murder was committed for a perverted sexual thrill, and Carr was described as a tough, streetwise tomboy. He said that Katie's heart, liver and stomach had been stabbed repeatedly, and so had her genitals. He stated, "It must have been some sort of frenzied attack. Her body had been dragged after death, but there was no evidence of sexual assault by a man." He spoke about Carr telling the jury, "The death of Katie haunts her, but also she appears to exult and rejoice in what she's done, even to the extent of saying the sexual thrill the killing gave her. The prosecutor continued, telling the jury how Carr had admitted to killing Katie to numerous people, including probation officers, prison officers, social workers and detectives. Carr had even spoken about the murder while on the phone at the Young Offenders Institution. In one call, she had asked a friend to get rid of a black knife because otherwise she would be in a lot of trouble. In a later phone call with this same friend, she was asked whether she had done it. She replied, "Yes, I done it. Little bad girl, isn't it?" In a later phone call with her mother from March of 1996, Carr was asked if she had told anybody. Her mother then said, "Tell nobody and tell nothing to them police. I think you should learn your lesson by now. Don't trust nobody." Her mother then asked her, "Did you really do it?" Carr replied, "Yeah, but it was ages ago." Her mother queried, "You didn't stab her or nothing?" Carr responded, "Well, yeah." On the first day of the trial, the jury got to hear the disturbing journals and poems that Carr had written. They showed a girl veering between being haunted by Katie's memory and glorifying in what she had done. While in most of the writings, Carr seemed pleased with what she had done, in one she seemed remorseful. She questioned, "I am a sad specimen of human life. Oh, why did I have to use that knife?" Testimony was also presented about Carr's many confessions, including the incriminating statements to people at the detention centre. Probation officer Sarah Bryden testified about what Carr had told her. She said that Sharon Carr said, "When I die, someone will have to shoot me because I couldn't be stabbed. It must be awful, knowing what's happening." In another conversation after Carr confessed to the murder, she told Bryden that she didn't feel sympathy for Katie's parents because they were old. Bryden testified, she said she had enough of her own problems with her own mother without feeling sorry for them. She said she would be willing to say she was sorry for what happened to Katie, but in reality, she never would be. After the prosecution rested, defence attorney Susan Matthews began her opening statements. She referred to Carr as a magpie and said she had gathered details about the murder and then made what she described as a false confession. She described her client as being bored and unhappy when she made the claims that she killed Katie. She stated, "She's taken a murder that belongs to someone else and made a false confession about it. There's no evidence against her apart from what she has generated herself." The defence attorney continued, "The scenario is of a girl aged 12 years who would appear to have carried out a motiveless random attack on a young woman of 19 and then concealed that murder for 3.5 years. According to defence attorney Matthews, the writing by Carr in her journal contained material from songs or books. She stated, "The fact she is like a magpie with her writing goes hand in hand with the false confession she made in respect to this murder." She continued and said that Carr was only attention-seeking when she made the confessions. She further suggested that it was a male who had killed Katie, saying that the murder had all the hallmarks of a sexually motivated crime. It was expected that the defence would begin calling witnesses, but after the opening statements, Matthews said they had rested their case. After that, the jury were sent off to deliberate. The case wasn't necessarily an easy one to judge, as there were still many unanswered questions. It had been revealed during trial that Carr had named her alleged accomplices, Michael Draper and Scott Champion. However, they had been thoroughly investigated by the prosecution and the defence and were ruled out of the investigation. They both had airtight alibis for that night, and both of their cars were forensically examined, and no evidence that Katie was ever in their car was found. Nevertheless, it was clear that somebody else must have been involved somewhere along the way, as Katie ended up 4 miles away from the nightclub. The jury deliberated for 6.5 hours over 2 days before returning with a verdict. They found Sharon Carr guilty of the murder of Katie Rackliff. Carr, who was wearing a gold crucifix, sat with her head in her hands as the announcement was made. The public gallery wasn't as quiet, and a gasp of relief followed by cheers and sobs emanated throughout the courtroom. Carr had just become the youngest female to be found guilty of murder in a British court. Mary Bell, who killed 2 boys when she was 11, had been found guilty of manslaughter. Mr. Justice Scott Baker ordered her to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure and set a minimum tariff of 14 years. In handing down the sentence, the judge said, "You had a sexual motive for the killing, which is clear in both the brutal manner in which you mutilated her body and the chilling entries in your diaries recounting what you did. That killing turned you on. You're an extremely dangerous young woman." He continued, stating, "The evidence suggests you were not alone when you stabbed Katie Rackliff to death. Who the other were and what part they played remains unclear." Outside of court, Katie's father, Joseph, said that Carr should be hanged and made to suffer like his daughter did. He then added, "As that can't happen, I hope she rots in hell. We are grieving people and will remain so for the rest of our lives." Joseph further said that he hoped that with the conviction, Carr would finally tell the truth about what had happened. Specifically, they wanted to know who her accomplice or accomplices were. Detective Chief Inspector John James also had some comments for reporters. He stated, "There's no satisfactory explanation. I would like to say she's mad, bad, or evil, but she is simply someone who seems to be beyond all our experience and expectation of what a murderer is like." Following her conviction for the murder of Katie, Carr was initially sent to HM Prison Holloway and then moved to Broadmoor Hospital in 1998. Broadmoor, which is a high-security psychiatric facility housing some of Britain's most dangerous criminals, was intended to help manage Carr's extreme behaviour. However, this facility became the unlikely setting for a relationship with a fellow inmate named Robbie Lane, who had murdered his own mother and gouged out her eyeballs. The news of their engagement in 2001 sparked public outcry. Katie's grieving father, Joseph, voiced his disgust, stating, "It's no kind of punishment. She took my little girl from me, and now she's allowed to get married, to have a life. This isn't justice, it's an absolute disgrace." Their engagement, however, ended soon after, as each found the other's crimes too horrific to accept. A Broadmoor nurse later remarked, "Obviously, they didn't tell each other about their past." Carr's attorneys continued to fight her conviction, attempting to reduce the charge to manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. Yet even within Broadmoor, Carr had continued her streak of violence, assaulting both staff and inmates and reportedly confessing that she wanted to kill another prisoner. In 2009, her minimum sentence was slightly reduced, allowing her first parole opportunity that year. The parole board, however, denied her release, stating her persistent volatility and inability to manage her impulses. Carr's struggles with incarceration persisted, and in 2020 she appealed to have her restrictive solitary status lifted. Once again, her bid was rejected. Prison authorities had uncovered threats she had made against other inmates, including plans to split open one prisoner's head. Justice Julian Knowles upheld the restrictions, finding no reduction in the public risk that Carr posed. Then in 2022, Carr's violence and intense emotional reactions were cited again when she made another attempt at parole, which the board once again denied. Her volatility and lack of remorse suggested she remained a significant danger, making her release an unacceptable risk. At 44 years old, Sharon Carr has been imprisoned far longer than her original minimum sentence. Her long and troubled incarceration, marked by continued aggression and refusal to conform. Today, she remains locked away, still considered too dangerous for the outside world. Well, besties, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to my newest supporters up on Patreon, Darren and Shelley. You can join Morbidology on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and there are absolutely no obligations. You can cancel your subscription at any point. I've recorded this episode 7 weeks in advance, but if everything has gone smoothly, then I should be giving birth in just 3 days. As I mentioned before, Morbidology will continue as a weekly podcast, and there won't be any changes. I've had to completely cut out any freelance work, so I'd just like to take a second and once more say thank you to everybody for supporting Morbidology, whether that be by joining me on Patreon, using one of my promo codes for my sponsors, or simply just listening to an episode. Your support has allowed me to have an income while I take maternity leave, and after, it's allowed me to work from home with a newborn, so thank you all again once so much. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read some true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.